Come along with me as I sew a new pair of comfy, cozy bottoms, and we discuss something that has been on my mind lately. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about this particular topic. It's something that came up in pattern support group where people go and ask questions about patterns, but it's a topic that I just wanted to address because I think a lot of people feel this way when they are sewing. I really want to hear what you think about this particular topic and idea. By the way, the pattern that I'm sewing today is the Resolution bottoms. I'll put a picture right here so you can see what this pattern entails. Basically, it has 4 different leg styles, and it's such a useful pattern because it's got leggings, it's got yoga pants, it's got like moto leggings and boot cut. It's like all the options for just like cozy, easy to wear bottoms. I'm making mine in this bamboo baby French terry. And one of the things that I love about the pattern is that it has a really cool yoke in the back. This is today's feature pattern. And in addition to the Resolution bottoms, which are a ladies pattern, we're also putting out the Thomas track pants for both menswear and kids wear. Those are all going to be on our feature sale. So everybody in the family can have some comfy, cozy bottoms for this fall or winter. Be great Christmas presents, really great, cozy, easy to sew, easy to wear kinds of makes. So take a look at that. Everything's linked in the bottom in the description box below. All right, so what is this topic that's been on my mind a lot lately? Let me tell you. Again, it was something that was brought up in our pattern support group, and I just feel like it was a really valuable topic and a really important idea that we all kind of have to make sense of for ourselves as we sew. Kind of encapsulated by this idea of trusting the process. And if you have a kid in your house right now, I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old girl, I hear this phrase all the time. They'll be like in the kitchen, going crazy with some random recipe, and they'll be like, "Mom, trust the process." And I'll be like, well, my intellect is telling me this is gonna be disastrous. I'm not gonna let you make a brownie in a coffee mug anymore because it just ends in chaos. No, I'm not gonna trust that process. But they say this all the time. Trust the process, trust the process, trust the process. And they'll be like doing some kind of like makeup look or something like that. And then I'll look at them and be like, what is happening? And they'll be like, "Mom, trust the process." And honestly, it's great for them to be experimenting with things and playing around and working out new ideas and seeing what works and what doesn't. Like personal experience kind of takes us, places that are good. It's a good thing to do. But I'm usually the one that ends up doing the dishes. I have some skepticism when it comes to trusting their process, right? One of the things that I think was hardest for me when it came to sewing was trusting the process that was laid out in a tutorial or in a size chart. It's hard to let go of what we see like on a surface level. It's hard to let go of that and just, because sometimes that means that we waste our time or we waste fabric or we waste our energy, our very, very precious energy on something that might not be what we needed it to be. So it's hard to trust the process. And one of the things that inspired this particular video and this thought here was a woman who had made up the Resolution bottoms and had the pattern printed out, and she was confused, rightfully so, because the pattern piece for Resolution bottoms was unique look. I'll put a picture here of what I mean by that. The pattern piece is like a little strange maybe. When she spoke with everybody, what she found in some of the comments back was, "I can't explain it, but these work for me." And sometimes these unintuitive shapes and design choices don't really make sense on the surface, but then once you do it and try it yourself, they work great. For example, I sewed up the exact same version and sizing as the person that was questioning about these, rightfully so, and I had success. That's me personally, and we probably have very different body types.
I was just thinking about a couple of ways that we sometimes have to just say that to ourselves as we're sewing. Like sometimes we have to just trust that when it comes to like seam allowances or sizing or ease that's built into a pattern, we kind of just have to trust that the designer has worked this stuff out and it's been tested, and that in the end it'll work out. Obviously, not every pattern works for every body. I think we all know that. But when you are working with a reputable sewing pattern company, those things do tend to work out in the testing process for the most part. And of course, not every pattern is going to fit every body perfectly right out of the packet. There's something to trusting the process and seeing what you end up with and being able to make accommodations or adjustments for your unique shape as you go. But starting with a pattern that is reliable is important. So anyway, she had posted about this, and I was just curious about this pattern. So I thought back to the last time that I sewed it up, and this is actually the piece in question. So if you look at this, it feels kind of weird. Like this leg here feels a little wide. I'm sewing a size large in the Resolution bottoms. This is the bootcut yoga pants view. This is the back of the pattern piece. And if you're looking at this, it feels like, what's with the angle here? It's kind of strange. I actually have to shorten because I'm 5'2", which is exactly this, I think, the same size and height that the original poster had. So I'm kind of replicating the process here. And I just wanted to kind of do like a proof of concept for everybody so we can see what this all works out to. There are lots of moments like this in sewing where we kind of have to trust the process. So let's talk about some other moments in sewing specifically where we have to kind of trust the process, go with what the pattern directs, even though our initial feelings kind of go against that. And I'm thinking for me personally about some of my first times sewing and how there were some things that I had to do that just didn't make sense to me. First on that list for me was sewing an arm side, sewing a sleeve to an arm side. I didn't understand how these crazy different lines matched up. Like, how do I sew a convex line to a concave line? It just really felt so foreign and so against what I would normally be inclined to do. That it just, I don't know, it was baffling to me as I was sewing. And then when you do it and you're like, whoa, this actually all ended up perfectly, it feels really satisfying and really nice, you know, very reassuring to kind of go through that process. But we're trying to get a flat plane to wrap around a 3D object. Or another thing that seems foreign, but you just kind of have to trust the process with it. What about when you are joining princess seams on a sewing pattern? You've got, you know, one, again, curved seam joining to another oppositely curved seam, and it just kind of feels very strange, but you trust the process and then it all works out really beautifully. Or one of the things that really hits home for me is sewing like an inset panel to something like, for example, like on the Whistler hoodie or pullover, or on like Presto, it has like that, or Vivace Dolman, it has like this inset panel, and when it comes down to it, you actually have to sew a straight flat line to like a right angle line. And what that involves is you shifting the fabric and doing like a pivot point and stuff. But when you're in that process, it just really doesn't make sense at all until you see it put together. Or maybe even like the yoke of the pants. So this is actually the side seam of the yoke for the Resolution bottoms. And in fact, the Thomas track pants for the men's and boys, they have a really cute yoke version like this as well. Because there's actually gonna be 4 joins here. And it's gonna feel really bulky, but until you get it underneath your sewing machine and you nest your seam allowances like you need to, it's gonna feel strange. Another one of those trust the process moments kind of comes, or at least it came for me, when I was sewing bias tape. Because I wanted to line up the raw edges and make those all fit together the way it looked like when the pieces were right sides together. But I wasn't supposed to line those pieces all perfectly straight up. That actually made lots of jagged edges in my seam allowances. I needed to have them offset a little bit to accommodate the future seam allowance. And so it's like one of those things that just doesn't really click until you do it at your sewing machine. You just gotta trust the process. Even when it comes to like sizing, there are different kind of rules that go to sizing, but one of the common ideas for sizing, at least with Love Notions patterns, is that you should size down if you are in between measurements. And that's because the size range starts at the highest number of that pattern range, size range, and then goes up to the next range. So you would technically fall inside of that smaller size for that range. And it kind of doesn't make sense right away for some people. It works.
I just want to go back to the original poster's question or thought and just validate how that is a question, a concern that makes complete sense. I totally see where she was coming from. And while she was struggling with the situation and other people hadn't struggled, didn't make her struggle or questions any less valid. It's a very valid, thoughtful point of view to have. And I think what it comes down to is, can you trust the pattern company that you are dealing with? What's been your success rate with other patterns in their collection? Also considering the fact that it's always a good idea to make a muslin and do a test to see how things work for you and then make any accommodations from there. It's a really important part of the sewing process for almost anyone that sews.
Okay, at this point I have all of my pattern pieces cut out. This is a humongous cut of bamboo baby French terry, and I am gonna have so much left over. I wonder if I should sew next week's Feature Friday with it too. But I'm really excited to have this really nice drapey. It just feels so good. So I'm joining the contour part of the yoke to the pattern right now. And look, this doesn't feel like it's going to fit, but it fits really, really well. And it gives a really nice, beautiful curve. I'll show you in a minute. So anyway, I was really grateful for that feedback and that thought. I think it's a good reminder that we sometimes just kind of need to test out things for ourselves, and it doesn't all feel like super intuitive. I am not an intuitive sewer. This is essentially geometry, I guess. And funnily enough, my husband was in my geometry class in high school. We've been together since we were in high school. And he was the one that would do my homework for me. So the idea of like planes and the geometry of like the spatial thinking that's required for a lot of sewing patterns does not come naturally to me at all. And I'm gonna blame my husband for that. By the way, this is a picture of him in the Thomas track pants that I sewed for him. He wears these all the time for like working out and just around the house. He especially also loves that I sewed the North Star zip up to match with it, which would be a great set if you were sewing for anyone this season. I am actually not referencing the directions for my Resolution bottoms because I've made them many times. I'm just gonna go ahead and clip everything and get it in place so that when I get it underneath my sewing machine, it'll be just a real quick run through. So I'm attaching the pockets right now, just putting the pocket bags or the pocket linings. Tell me, how do I differentiate that? What's the difference between a pocket bag and a pocket lining? I feel like I use those words interchangeably, and I'm sure Tammy knows the right difference, but tell me here, how do I like remember what's a pocket bag and what's a pocket lining? I would have assumed that the pocket bag is the thing you can't see, and then the pocket lining is the thing that kind of like curves up and that you can see from the outside. But I don't know. I'd love to hear what your expert opinion is on that particular topic. Okay, I think I have everything clipped and I'm ready to get to the sewing machine. This is such a fast sewing project. Actually, before I get over to the sewing machine, I am going to be so good and I'm going to fold up my excess fabric here. I spent several hours today cleaning up our sewing studio and our sewing space. We have some upcoming projects that I'm so excited about, and we just needed to have like a clear space to get everything all organized. So I went through the whole studio today. I like went through like our ironing cart, like our pressing cart. I cleaned up our cutting cart that we kind of carry around as we are doing cutting. Got everything organized there. I organized the stuff that Tammy has at her sewing space because she has like she has some preferences about what exactly she has at her sewing space. So if you ever want to know about that and what we swear by when it comes to like sewing tools and things that we have at the ready, let me know. All right, I'm ready to press a little bit. So I sewed the pocket bag or lining or whatever it is to the front main of the pants, and then I understitched that as well so that everything will lay flat. And then I'm just gonna give that a really nice good press so that it'll all be sealed in and I won't have to worry about anything poking out while I wear it. I pressed the seam flat first, and now I'm going to press it with it folded over, and hopefully that will take care of these front slant pockets. And for sewing these pockets on, I absolutely would recommend using just a sewing machine and not a serger, because a serger is just gonna add way too much bulk. And you want this to be as flat as possible. And since this is a knit pattern, it is really not gonna matter if the edges are not fully finished here. It's all gonna be kind of like all encapsulated inside. And I could top stitch this as well, but these are just gonna be a comfy pair of pants. I don't have to go too crazy. I have seen a lot of people do really, really fun things with the Resolution bottoms when it comes to like doing an overlocker stitch over them. So they would use like the leggings version and then use their overlocker to do that stitch that looks like they're like Lululemon leggings. That is very, very cool. But these are just gonna be my comfy lounge around the house pants, and I don't need to go that fancy. So my next stop is going to be to sew the yoke to the pant back. So I did use a serger for this part because I do want the insides to be really nicely finished. You could totally use a sewing machine for this part as well. I feel like the extra bulk is like worth it for me. I'll show you a trick to joining these since it's many seams kind of all layered together. I'll show you a trick to joining these when we get to that step. Another thing that Tammy told me when I was sewing that just didn't really make sense to me when I was initially thinking about it was, you know how like you kind of want the seam allowance to go in like a certain way, and what she said to me was let the seam allowance go where it wants to fall naturally, and that will end up really, really great for your project. I used to think that pressing was kind of like optional, especially for a knit project, but it's very much not, at least in my experience. All right, let's get back to sewing our pockets on the front piece. So I've got my pocket with the front and the lining or whatever connected there, and I'm going to now line up the pocket piece like this. So I've got my front I have my bag or lining, and then I've got the coordinating pocket lining piece that's gonna fill in the rest of my pants pattern. So I'm gonna connect those right sides together and then sew those up. I think I'm gonna use my serger for this part. At this point, my pockets are all sewn and the front pieces are just waiting to be attacked next, but I'm gonna be taking my back pants pattern pieces, putting them right sides together, and then I'm gonna be sewing this curved seam right here. This is like where the butt goes. I wanted to note that I'm going to be matching up my T's or my triangle markings to put those together. But as I'm attaching these, I wanted you to see, this is kind of like a pet peeve of mine, that with a yoke like this yoke piece, it is so easy for these seams at the yoke to be completely off. It could be because fabric stretches, it could just be like pulling as you're sewing, it could be a million different things. But let me just show you the trick that I have for getting those all to line up. And this is again one of those things of like, trust the process. It might not feel right initially, but once you get it under your machine and under that needle, it makes sense. So what I like to do is match up those seams as good as I can and match up my raw edges, but I'm nesting them. So if you take a look at this, this top seam allowance is gonna go this way, towards that way, and the bottom seam allowance is gonna go that way, and I'm gonna nest those. And then I'm gonna put a pin right here along this line so that I know where those seams are going to end up at. And if I'm lucky, we will get seams that join perfectly. So let's see if I can do that. One of the really helpful things is to baste this line of stitching first, and also to make sure that this line of the yoke is matched up all the way down the yoke piece. Sometimes we get it matched up just at the raw edge here, but it's way more important that it's matched up at the seam line for the yoke. So I did a basting stitch at my regular sewing machine, and this is the match. I'm so pleased with how that looks. You gotta love it when a plan comes together. I really like using the basting stitch first on my regular sewing machine, nesting those layers, and then using my serger. So now I'm gonna press this, everything right sides together first, and then I'll go back over and press the seam allowance flat against one side, and I'm just gonna let it kind of pick whichever side feels right as I get to it. So now I'll press it open. It's kind of funny, the steam from the iron just kind of makes magic sometimes. All right, this is my yoke. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? All right, the back pants are finished. Now I'm gonna do kind of the same thing with the front crotch curve of the front pants pattern pieces. And then I'll just have to sew up the side seams and the inseam, and the main part will be completely done, and I'll just have to do the yoga waistband. Now this pattern does have two different kinds of waistbands. You can do a yoga waistband, which is the easiest for sure, but it also has a contour waistband. It's a curved waistband piece. It's just a little bit more involved than the yoga one pattern piece where you just match up quarter points. So the contour waistband is just a little bit more complicated, more pattern pieces. So I almost always opt for using the yoga waistband. I really like it. But if you're using a fabric that is not especially good with like good recovery, I would not use that fabric for a yoga waistband. Even this baby French terry, I'm a little bit like nervous that that waistband won't be quite enough recovery. So I might have to go back in later and use a different, use the contour waistband, but I'm gonna just test it out and see if it works for the moment. The contour waistband, like I said, it has more pattern pieces, but also has elastic embedded into it. So that makes it even more like secure, and to make sure that it's got enough stretch and then recovery to stay on you really well. So time to sew this front curve. All right, I've got my front curve sewn, and I'm gonna just take my front and line it up on the cutting table here, and then put my backs over that, and I'm gonna match up the side seams. I'm just gonna pin these or clip these in, and I'm gonna sew my side seams, and then I'll be able to sew the inseam. This almost feels like a game, but you might see something inside of this room that Tammy put here a little while ago. It's actually a sample for a new pattern that she's got on the docket. I'm sure you can't see any of the specifics of it, but she's got the bodice sewn up for a new holiday dress pattern. And I was just looking at it a little while ago, and oh, I have so many good ideas for this dress pattern. It looks like such a fun thing to sew. There's nothing like a good knit dress, you know, like, ugh, so good. So I can't wait to share that with you. And I'm not gonna like draw attention to it because it's certainly not finished, but Tammy's been planning on this for a while, and I think it's gonna be really, really cool. So just, you know, if you happen to see something laying around here that looks interesting, it might be that new pattern. So make sure that you are following along and are subscribed to all of the Love Notions stuff, all of our channels, our newsletter, and all that stuff, so that you can be the first to know when that new gorgeous pattern releases. So at this point in the process, I have got my out seams and my inseams sewn. I'm ready to attach my yoga waistband, but I'm about to lose my light, and I better get home to make sure that the girls haven't destroyed my kitchen with their trust the process cooking. I hope that you realize when it comes to Love Notions patterns, you really can trust the process. And even when we get to steps or pattern pieces or things that feel a little strange, that we can trust the process. I know that we can't sew every pattern right out of the packet and it fits perfectly for everybody. We're all too different for that. But I hope that you can trust the process enough to start and dive in and rely on us for help when you get stuck. Will you do me a favor? Will you help us in that trust but verify kind of process? Will you help us by logging into your Love Notions account and leaving a review on any of the patterns that are currently in your account, even the ones that you got for free, like the classic tee. That's a pattern that you can get for free when you're a subscriber to the newsletter. So take a second to log in, add in your real human thoughts and opinions to these pieces. It makes a world of difference for us as a small business and helps us stand apart from the AI generated slop that exists out in the world today. There's a lot of patterns you can't trust, that it would be a waste of time to pursue because literally no human has ever touched it before. Love Notions is a little different. You can definitely trust us. And we would just love it if you would add in a review. This would be especially helpful for us as we prepare for the upcoming site-wide sale at Love Notions. So a couple of patterns that you might want to put on your wish list now that you've got your resolution bottoms or your Thomas track pants for men's or kids. There's some patterns that would go great with those. For example, like Breckenridge Henley, which is what I'm wearing here. The Geneva pullover would be gorgeous with these. The Constellation Navigator pullover, the North Star pullover, all of those would be really wonderful to pair with these. So go in to those pattern listings and you can click the little heart and it adds it to your wish list so that you can save it for our upcoming site-wide sale. All of the links that you need are in the description box below, and as always, we'd love to have you stay tuned with us. So like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment. Thank you so much for everybody who asks the important questions when it comes to sewing, and thanks for even anyone who is maybe like a little skeptical when it comes to sewing. I hope that you can learn to trust the process, that you can adjust as needed, and that you end up with something that you love in your sewing room. I'll see you later. Bye.